Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. Today is the March 2025 Ask Me Anything episode. Just going to roll straight into it here because the first question is from Mackenzie, and the question is, how's the podcast going? So, early days, obviously, but good response to the one that I released with Zoe Saeta, and I have a couple podcasts in the can. Ethan Pringle will be on the show in a couple weeks. Juliet Hammer is going to be on the show. And I've got some more guests lined up after that. So, yeah, I'm working on my budding skills of scintillating conversation. They're still pretty young, but we'll see how things go. It's definitely interesting, and I've taken to the editing faster than maybe I thought I would. So that's kind of nice. Other than that, I guess we'll just, we'll see, one thing at a time. But so far, so good. Next question is from Luke. Luke says, Sling Blade update, question mark, question mark, question mark. And a couple other people asked about this too. Sling Blade is a V13 that I have been trying in Leavenworth. Tried it last fall. And then I tried it a little bit again this spring. And it's kind of hard to answer this question really succinctly. I guess the short version is I don't know how much more I'll try it this spring because it has some specific demands on the body that I don't think I'm quite up to right now. It's really, really hard on the right hamstring. And I think it took a little bit more of a toll on my right hamstring last fall than I knew until I started trying it again this spring, and my hamstring was not as recovered as I would have expected from taking 3 months away from it. I'm not sure that that's going to keep me from climbing on it at all, but I need to sort of be smart about how much I try it because you really are on your right leg the whole problem. So I think I need to properly rehab that strained muscle before I can give it a solid effort. The kind of medium perspective answer is that my overall health hasn't been great, which is probably part of why that muscle sprain has lingered as long as it has. That and how much heel hooking we do here in the Northwest, it's just sort of hard to get your hamstrings to heal sometimes. But overall, as far as making progress on a V13 for myself in my own climbing, Sling Blade Low definitely feels the closest that I've ever been, and I'm super motivated to keep working on it. I think it really suits my skills. I've done all the moves quite a few times, and I've made really good links into the meat of the problem. So I know it's something that I could do with a sustained effort. It's just a question of being healthy enough to be able to put that effort in. I think that's something that is really hard to convey about super hard projecting is like, you can't bang your head against stuff the way that you can in your 20s, especially early 20s. I really have to sort of pick and choose my battles. And if that means I don't climb V13 until a few years from now, that's fine. But if you ask me right now to just make a bet as to whether or not I'll ever climb Sling Blade, I think I would make a pretty healthy bet that I will climb it someday. And that means I'm a good chunk of the way into the projecting process, which is cool. So I'm looking forward to climbing on it more. We'll see. Jeffrey says, can you explain soft pause and gaze? I've heard you say it in your beta breakdowns, but I'm not sure I understand how to use them on the wall. So Jeffrey's referring to the technical breakdowns that I do on Patreon. You can find those on my Patreon. Almost all these questions are from patrons. Patrons get priority on the AMA questions. And I also post technique breakdowns on there, which are like 10-minute videos of breaking down someone's send of something and explaining the principles behind their beta that they choose and the way they move and how things go right and how things go wrong, that kind of stuff. And I kind of cover the same concepts on there over and over, which is, I think, going to be useful as I do it longer because it'll help people start to see these patterns, and hopefully you'll also start to see those patterns in your own climbing. So two that have come up a few times are soft pause and gaze. And I'll start with gaze because I think that's a more straightforward concept. Gaze is just, where are you looking while you're climbing? And if you watch beginner climbers, you're basically never going to see them look down. They'll often even be moving their feet without looking down. And if you watch someone climb a ladder, just a standard ladder, like they probably are not looking down to place their feet. So when we have a solid understanding of where the foothold is, maybe not necessary for us to make eye contact with it. But as we get better and better at climbing, especially technical climbing where you're making a lot more foot moves per hand move, looking down at the feet becomes really essential. And good climbers actually spend more time looking down than they do looking up. And that is a very basic example of the demands of what you're doing kind of drive where your gaze needs to be. And your gaze can also drive what you're doing. So another really good example to understand gaze would be go watch the World Cups and look at the climbers who are sticking these really complicated cordo moves and foot plants where they need to make contact with, sometimes more than one handhold and more than one foothold chained together in the same movement. A lot of the time you'll see them take a kind of wide perspective on these things and then laser target their gaze on the actual end of the cordo move, either at a stable point in the middle of the cordo move or right before they launch. So they're sort of taking everything in, but then making very direct eye contact with the end goal at a critical moment. And it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do thing. Like we go where we look. If you've ever mountain biked, like a really common early lesson in mountain biking is you're going to ride the bike wherever you look. So if there's an obstacle in the trail, you want to look at the part of the trail that you want to stay on. Don't look at the obstacle because you'll ride the bike straight into the rock or whatever it is, right? And it really is the same thing in climbing. I think we're just not quite as cognizant of it because it's a slower sport. And one other thing I'll say about gaze is it can be an important psychological mediator, or like arousal level mediator. So if you are sport climbing and you reach a rest point and you're super maxed out, high heart rate, feeling pumped, but you're at a good rest, right? You're kind of at a stance, not like a ledge. You're still holding on to something, but you can hang out there. Really good climbers who want to bring their heart rate down and bring down that arousal level are very good at managing their gaze. You'll see them looking at the hold they're holding onto. You'll see them looking down and even just relaxing their neck, especially if it's really steep. Beginner climbers and people who are on-sighting and under a lot of stress, people who are maybe afraid of what's coming up or afraid of falling, will spend a lot of time looking up and looking at the route, even while they're trying to depump. And I think it is useful to look up and examine the rest of the route, but we want to do that after we've brought that arousal level back down, and then we're like ready to engage with the route again. So that's just an example of how where you look can sort of determine how you climb and what you're thinking about. Soft pause, on the other hand, is a technical concept that I use with people. It has a bunch of different facets to it, but the short version of soft pause is, if I was going to break it into a technical drill, it would be to climb in a series of like stop, go kind of robotic movements, basically stabilizing a position and then creating a counter movement and creating a movement where you dead point and then stopping, right? So it'd be like this look, pause, go. Look, pause, go. And basically the idea behind the soft pause is to ensure that we are making eye contact with the target before we initiate movement, which can be really important for some people. Some people will start to initiate movement and then try to find the target. That's a common problem. It also ensures that we're in a stable position before we start creating that counter movement. If we're still swinging or swaying or readjusting on the holds and we're starting to make the next move already, a lot of the time that can mess with your flow and mess with your coordination. It also is good for sort of creating aggression and try hard. And then maybe one of the final things is a lot of people struggle with double or triple or even more pumping. So like double pumping would be you pull towards the target and then you relax and then you pull towards the target again and then you relax and then you pull again and you go. One pump can be nice on a big dyno to get that stretch reflex for the second counter movement before you jump. But if you do that, if you do a pump and then you come to a complete stop and then you do another pump, you're not getting any stretch reflex. You're just hesitating. So if I was gonna have that person do the soft pause drill, part of the goal of the drill would be no double pumping. So you make a hand move, you move your feet, you take the soft pause where you're gonna stabilize, look at your target, and then go. You move your feet again, get set, soft pause, and then you go. And kind of create this punctual rhythm with the movements where we're doing every move as a dead point, whether that's necessary or not. And we're using those pauses to just sort of ensure that we're doing a good job with each move as we go. In the real world, you're not really going to see people climb using a soft pause on every single move, but it is really helpful to occasionally bring in a very deliberate pause just to make sure we're bringing maximum intention to the move that we're doing at that moment. Okay, next question. Lou asks, hi, I'd love to hear your thoughts about optimum duration of board climbing. When should we step away? I've heard varying recommendations from the moment maximum power output is exhausted to 90 minutes. Any general guidelines that you recommend? Thanks. So first general guideline, and this applies to all sessions, not just board sessions, is to just know what the goal of the session is. And I think one trap that is just very common in climbing training is to kind of smudge everything together and just go for total effort. Like I want to climb, if you just want to climb harder, then it's like, well, if I just want to climb harder, then why should I have a primary physical goal for my session? Well, the reason is that it's hard to send a lot of signals to the body at the same time. The more signals you send it, the harder it's going to be for your body to adapt to any of those specific signals. So that's an important thing to keep in mind is like, if you're trying to get power or capacity or endurance out of the session, it's possible to do a little bit of all of those things in the same week for sure. It's probably possible to do those things all in a day, but it's going to be a lot more complicated for most people than focusing on something and just making sure that we get a very clear stimulus and a very clear adaptation from each session. So if the goal is to be more powerful or feel stronger, then it definitely makes sense to stop the session when your maximum power drops, especially for a projecting session or like a red point style session, maybe like a 3x3 or a 4x2. You definitely want to stop when your power drops with those kind of sessions. That would be probably the worst session to drag into a capacity style session, would be to start out projecting and then just keep going and going and going and dropping the grade and dropping the grade and dropping the grade. Number one, because you're drowning out that power signal that you sent the body earlier in the session. And number two, because climbing is a very coordinated sport. And when your power output is lower and you can't do what you're asking your body to do, like when you try to latch a hold, it just doesn't have the power that it had 30 minutes ago to latch that hold. Then you sag away from the wall or you lose your body tension and your foot pops, and you've suddenly created a lot of risk for yourself. So if the goal of the session is power, that's fine. But we want to end those sessions early, both to keep that power signal as pure as possible and also to reduce the risk as far as we can. If the goal of the session is capacity, and I think of capacity here as being how far you can, how many moves you can do in a session, or like how much distance you can travel in a session, how many good attempts you could have in a session would be another good way to think about it, or how many good attempts you could have in a week. That might need to be a longer session, and I would even say 90 minutes could even be short for a capacity style session. Obviously, you're going to need to be a very proficient board climber in order to have the intensity, to be able to maintain an intensity on a board such that you can challenge your capacity. Means you're going to need to be a good enough climber that you have a wide range of difficulties available to you on a board. If it's really hard for you to climb V4 on a moon board, you're not going to be doing a capacity session on a moon board because you're going to power out before you can challenge your capacity. But if you climb V9 on a moon board, then more than likely you could have a pretty long capacity session on V4s. And then you'll be challenging the appropriate thing, be getting that clear stimulus, getting that clear adaptation. Probably the other main thing that you would try to get out of a session would be endurance. So that's like how many moves or how much distance you can do in a single attempt before you start to before you start to like lose your coordination or your power on that attempt. And with that type of training, it's a lot harder to make clear guidelines because it really depends on the difficulty of the moves and the endurance range that you're targeting. That gets into like individual energy systems. But most endurance sessions on a board or on a spray wall are probably not going to be much longer than 90 minutes for the actual session. Endurance and power endurance especially are where things get really muddy because we do want some of that like high power output type climbing, but we also are trying to challenge how long we can stay on the wall. And that's challenging multiple systems at the same time. And so it's just always going to be necessarily more complicated. We can't just set the clear rule of stop when your power is exhausted, because by definition, what we're trying to do is exhaust our power and then keep going. So the key with that kind of session is to the actual numbers and like time on the wall, number of reps, number of moves done. That stuff really matters with those kind of sessions, and it needs to be managed and progressed very carefully. Whereas with a power or a capacity style session, I think it's a lot easier to just be intuitive with those things. Like for a power session, just like stop the session when your power drops. For a capacity session, it's like stop the session when you're fatigued or your skin is done, or based on how much time you have to recover before your next session. With an endurance session, you really do kind of want some clear guardrails, but you sort of want to stick to some sort of progression so that you can keep sending that stimulus week on week. And like one pretty common guideline that I'll use, this doesn't work for everybody, but board triples is a pretty good way of doing strength endurance. So that would be like repeating a board problem 3 times in a row and then resting until you're basically fresh. So let's say you could do triples at V7. You could do a V7 3 times in a row, and you could sustain that for 4 sets. And then on the 4th set, that V7 was like really hard on the 3rd lap of that set. And then you drop down to V6. And if you could do the V6s, but the 3rd rep was really hard, maybe you drop down to V5, and I would do a triple at V5, but then I would stop. I wouldn't drop down to V4 and then V3, because at a certain point, the power has dropped off so far that we're deviating into just capacity or just like maybe not junk mileage, but the power output is so low that it's certainly not power endurance anymore. It's just not hard enough climbing to really qualify. That might be a little bit of a nuanced answer, but hopefully that's helpful. All right, Ryan says, long-time listener, first-time commenter, thoughts on improving at slopers and pinches in a time-efficient manner. I have a tiny spray wall in my basement and could set a couple moves or positions. Most of my climbing these days is on a moon board or at the red. I can hit the sets a bit, but curious if there's some little things I could do on my spray wall or using other at-home implements to start nudging those weaknesses up. Yeah, I think climbing on a moon board and at the red, obviously these are going to be deficit grips for you. So there's always a tension in climbing training between focusing on the things that feel the most important for our goals or for our overall progression right now, and focusing on the things that we are maybe not challenged by on our goals or in our climbing right now, but we know that they're low-hanging fruit for our general improvement. And if Ryan was going to go on a trip to Kalymnos or Font or something, he might be suddenly really, wishing that he had done more work on pinches and slopers back in the day when he was just climbing on the moon board and at the red. So let's just assume that Ryan has a little bit of training headroom for some things. If Ryan's already knee-deep in a training plan for climbing at the red or climbing on a moon board, then adding more stuff might not make sense. And I think it's always a good general rule to think, when I'm adding this strenuous thing to my training, what will I take out in order to make space for it? My biggest goal for improving weaknesses that we could look at as technical things, and you can definitely look at slopers and pinches as technical things. The first thing would be don't walk by easy opportunities to improve these things. So that could be in the gym, or if you're out at the bouldering crag. I think Ryan has some bouldering goals now. Let's say you're walking to the V6 you want to check out so that you can potentially project it, and there's a wall on your way into that V6 that has a V1 and a V2 and two V3s on it, and they all look really slopey. Maybe you don't want to burn your whole day on those, but if you just walk by that to go to the V6 that's like crimpy and in your style, it's kind of, you're sort of just shooting yourself in the foot by not taking those easy lessons on board. And I think people fall in this trap of thinking like, because I climb quote unquote V8 or whatever, that I don't have anything to gain from doing a V2 sloper problem. But if you know that slopers are a weakness for you, you absolutely have something to gain from doing a V2 sloper problem. Actually, I think most people would probably benefit more in terms of their grip deficits and their movement deficits from spending a lot of time repeating really easy things outside in those deficit styles, rather than slavishly training with a wrist wrench or something like that, which will make you better at the grip itself. But climbing is just such a skill sport. The idea of not walking by easy opportunities to improve that skill specifically is definitely the highest and best form of improving things. A related tip is I would make a list of problems with pinches and slopers that are, maybe not on the way to your project, but just things that you would, be interested in checking out. If there's like roots at the red that notoriously have a cool pinch on them. I mean, I know the red is like pretty pockety and juggy, I think is the general gist, but maybe there's the odd tufa or something like that. I really don't know. Not a tufa, but sandstone's a version of that. I think there is actually a pretty famous 514 tufa. I've seen video of it or something, but that's probably a little too hard. But yeah, making a list of problems or roots that have those grips or have the movements you're trying to work on is good just to have it in your back pocket. It's not even a list that you're like actively pursuing. It's more just like, if I'm ever at this crag, I should try this thing because I heard it has a cool pinch on it. And then you get an opportunity to grab a new pinch. As far as training stuff, because I know that's what Ryan wants, slopers really do require climbing on them in order to get good at them. Body position and body tension are just fully essential for being good at slopers. It's not just a grip. It really is everything that's happening in your whole body. As far as the grip itself and being able to maintain a lot of tension with the different wrist angles, what you're really talking about is being in wrist flexion. So that's if you're holding your hand neutral, bringing your fingers closer to the front of your forearm. That would be wrist flexion. And then bending your hand backwards, the other way would be wrist extension. So bringing your knuckles close to the back of your forearm. Most slopers require you to stay in wrist flexion and resist extending any further. And so we need to be able to create tension in the forearm flexors to hold that position. And then we also need to have tension in the hand and in the fingers in order to keep our hand in whatever position it's in on that hold. And for most climbers, that's going to be a matter of coordination first, because we have pretty strong forearm flexors. So what we need to learn how to do is how to isometrically hold that position while we move our body around underneath it. Not all climbers will necessarily be strong in that range, so there may be some range training necessary in order to get good at it as well. And the things that you're looking for are going to be wrist pronation. So that's hard to explain on a podcast, but if you Google wrist pronation, you'll see what it is. Basically, doing a standard pull-up on a pull-up bar, you're in pronation, and that's usually what you're going to be in for a lot of slopers as well. You're very rarely going to be in supination, which would be like the chin-up grip. But training pronosupination, which is switching from pronation to supination, you've probably seen people at the gym like holding a hammer by the very end of the handle and like turning the hammer. That's not my favorite form of training it. And I think some climbing coaches or maybe even consider overt pronosupination training to be risky. But there are ways to train it, I think, that are relatively safe. And I think doing something to train your wrist pronation is probably smart for slopers. And then doing something to train your wrist flexion is probably smart for slopers. So the pronation is going to be something with a dumbbell or a kettlebell. And then the wrist flexion is going to be either hanging from slopers or maybe a grip device like a wrist wrench would be really good. And then another thing with slopers that's probably overlooked is the ability to create force in the hand itself. There's like 8 biomechanical ways that we can pinch things. And a lot of slopers involve manipulating the grip and manipulating the hand. So like we make a very clear distinction a lot of the time when we're talking about beta between like this is a sloper or this is a meat hook. But a lot of the time when I'm holding onto a sloper, I'm creating some tension in my hand in a sort of meat hook style by actually squeezing the compartments of my thumb and my pinky together to create force inside my hand and kind of squeeze the grains of the rock together. And I think just general grip training is really the thing there, which I'll talk about a little bit in the pinches. But again, it's largely a coordination thing, and there's just no way to really get good at it without climbing on slopers. I've grabbed a lot of slopers over the years, and when you just throw yourself at something 10 times, it's like, you know, that 10th time you're like, oh, I like squeezed with my thumb a little bit differently there and it felt good. And you kind of realize like you need to understand how to use your whole hand. It's not just your fingers. It's not just crimping. There's so many muscles and so much stuff going on in your hand, and there's so many ways that you can manipulate it. I mean, these things really helped us evolve past the rest of the planet. They're pretty special. Your hands, that is. For pinches, mini pinching, so like really narrow pinches, really everything that you're going to use for crimping, for training crimping, is going to come in handy there because it's mechanically very similar on the fingers. The difference just being that the thumb is in opposition, and then you have that same compression through the hand that I was talking about, where like you're bringing your thumb and your pinky closer together and using the thenar and hypothenar compartments to create tension. But that can be trained in a general way, and then if you have good crimp grip, then you're going to be strong on a mini pinch where you're in that more aggressive grip with the fingers. On a wide pinch, you're not in that more aggressive grip. You're in a more open hand grip with the fingers, but that tension through the hand is still really important. So you'll see a lot of people do like pinch blocks for this. Personally, my favorite is to use the like talon ball or the talon grip. Atomic Climbing makes a ninja ball, a 3.5 inch ninja ball, which is a good size for most men. Maybe a 2.5 inch would be good for some people who have like really small hands. And I really like using it with my fingers slightly separated. If you're on my Patreon, there's a video on my Patreon of how to do this. And if you have all your fingers separated, then you're also getting all the muscles of the hand stimulated, which means you get a little bit of bonus for like training on pockets where your fingers are going to be pulled apart. But it's also just really good for that training of the actual strength across the hand itself. And a talon ball you could train with in a way that's like very similar to just doing block lifts on a 20 millimeter. So that's a type of training that fits in really well. And like one training regimen that I did last year, which I thought was really effective, was every weight training session, I would do 2 grip training exercises. And so I had 3 grips I was training. So I would basically do like session 1, I would do my other strength training, you know, on these days as well. But I would do like session 1, I did like grip A and grip B. Session 2, I did grip B and grip C. Session 3, I did grip C and grip A. So I was 2 out of every 3 sessions, I was hitting each grip. And then I was doing like a half crimp on a unlevel edge, and I was doing a more aggressive grip on a flat edge, and then I was doing a talon ball lift. So I was kind of like spreading around the stimulus a little bit because I wanted to work all 3 of those things, but I didn't want to do all 3 of them in one session. So that'll be an example of like how you can spread it out a little bit and not just like stack a ton of stuff up. But obviously if you add too many things to that list, then the stimulus becomes too infrequent. So hope that gives you some things to think about, Ryan. I think just not avoiding it and doing your best to create opportunities for yourself to practice it is always going to be king. I think you already know that. And beyond that, maybe just picking a small thing to add, like doing some talon ball training, doing a little bit of wrist pronation training, just getting those things in there at a minimum effective dose level and seeing if that makes any impact over like 6 to 8 weeks. All right. eejayen says how to deal with or program to account for DOMS from heavy lifts. This is a tricky subject. We don't really understand DOMS that well scientifically. I think there's like 6 hypotheses right now for what's actually causing DOMS at the you know, really discrete level. As far as my experience and what I program for with people, I don't think that you should have DOMS for a long time, like in a training program. So like if you do some lifts and you haven't done them in a while and you get sore from that, that should be fine. And then maybe you go climbing and you come back to those lifts next week and you do them again. Maybe they make you sore the second time you do them. Maybe they even make you sore like the third week you come back to those lifts. But if you're like 6 weeks into a training program and you're deadlifting and benching, and after every deadlift and bench session, you're super fucking sore, you're probably not recovering from your training super well. You either need to eat more, you need to sleep more, or you need to do less stuff. You should not be getting really hardcore DOMS from every lifting session. A lot of DOMS seems to be novelty. So when things are new or when you do something that you haven't done in a while. And a lot of DOMS seems to be training load and recovery. So I would look at those things, and if it's not obviously one of those things, I'd be a little bit curious to dig into the details. Yeah. And if you're just talking about like mild DOMS, by the way, if I didn't define it, this is delayed onset muscle soreness. So this is like you lift, you squat, and then the next day your quads are sore. If this is just like mild DOMS, who cares? Just go do stuff anyway. You're fine. It doesn't have any impact on your power output or anything like that. It's a little bit unpleasant, but I actually kind of like the way it feels. Like if I used to just train a lot more than I do now, more days in a row, but I loved the way that it felt to have a climbing session and be kind of sore, a mild session, and then try to have a really hard session the second day, because being slightly sore from the first session just made me it helped me connect to my muscles a little bit, if that makes sense. Like even though it was a little bit painful, I felt like I was getting a better mind-body connection because of that sensation of discomfort. I don't know if that's good training advice, but I liked it back in the day. I don't generally do that so much anymore. I try to climb and then lift and then take a rest day, so I'm not super sore for my climbing days. All right, Sam asks, will you make climbing philosophy a pillar of the pod? And if so, define it on the pod. Will I make climbing philosophy a pillar of the pod? Yeah, I think totally. It seems, I just can't even help myself. It's pretty unlikely that it's going to escape the subject of the podcast. Question 2, will I define climbing philosophy on the pod? I'm not sure if you want me to define climbing philosophy in general or define my own climbing philosophy. My own climbing philosophy has changed a lot, but these days I think it's something like make myself proud and stay humble, put in a good amount of effort. I'm not as driven to connect it really deeply to more overt values or outcomes than I used to be. But maybe something I need to revisit heading towards my 40s. Climbing philosophy in general, I mean, the idea of philosophy is that it can improve your life by helping you understand the reasons that you do things and helping you connect more deeply to your everyday decisions. And I think it's exactly the same for climbing philosophy. It's, there's a lot of different pieces of philosophy or areas of philosophy, but most of it is about values and ethics and norms, and all that stuff is applicable and super important in climbing. So I think we'll talk about all that stuff on the podcast. I'm excited to have guests who sort of think about these things as well, because I think that'll create interesting conversations for sure. Okay, William asks, how do you approach a new freestanding highball? That's a good question. I feel like I could make a whole YouTube video about this or something. So I'll try to be concise. You have to get on top of it. You have to drop a rope on it, which means you need to have a rope and know how to use it. You need to know how to self-belay. You need to know how to create an anchor. And then you have to clean it. And if you don't know how to do any of the things that I just listed, I would enlist a mentor, because there are a lot of skills in there which are things that are just best learned from having someone show you. You could for sure learn how to create anchors from a YouTube video, but it's going to be rather harrowing the first few times. I don't encourage you to do that. I think it's better to just go find someone who can show you how to do it. Learning how to self-fillet is equally something that you want someone to show you how to do, probably. It's not like terribly complicated, but you definitely want to know what you're doing. And it's fairly easy to practice this stuff on the ground and on small boulders and stuff. But again, I think just qualified instruction is the best choice. But once you have all that stuff set up and you're going to want a rope protector for any sharp edges, and then clean it top down. I like to use stiff nylon brushes unless there's a lot of vegetation and the rock is strong enough to deal with wire brushes. Lots of rock is not strong enough to have a wire brush, so you might want to know what kind of rock you're dealing with. And then it's a lot of scrubbing. Like, things need to be cleaned rather completely in order to be fun to climb on. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of wax on, wax off, and a lot of arm pump. And then once things are clean, I'll start thinking about how to climb it. And I also do that top down. So I'm usually thinking about that a little bit while I'm cleaning. And sometimes even like maybe if it's easy at the top, maybe I'm climbing it in my approach shoes a little bit as I go, just to be familiar with it. But most of the time it's a few different trips up the boulder, or a few separate sessions, and I'll work the moves top down basically. So starting with, any kind of head wall or slab where you're already on top of the boulder, I'll do that part first. And then if there's like a proper mantle, I might think about how to work that, because it can be kind of tricky to do a legit mantle while you're on self-belay. That takes a little bit of practice. But yeah, I'll basically work down the boulder in that same manner. If it's steeper than like 10 degrees overhanging, you're going to quickly learn that it's quite hard to work on the moves just on top rope by yourself. So at some point you have to kind of meet like the top of the boulder. You work your way down as far as you can, and then you sort of just want to know what you're doing up there. So you probably want to have linked that stuff, and then you're going to want to work the rest of the boulder bottom up. And if it's really steep, then the bottom up part will usually be most of the boulder, and then you just have like the top all cleaned and dialed and rehearsed, so that when you get there you have it figured out. It's a creative process, and really really fun, and worth investing time in. It's super good for your climbing, but it's definitely a lot of work. So go forth safely, and find somebody to instruct you if you can. There's nothing you're going to get from a podcast that's going to be half as good as just seeing someone who knows how to do their thing. Okay, final question. Leone. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Thoughts about concentric only finger curls done with weight plates instead of a force gauge? I think my opinion differs a little bit from some other people's here, but I don't even use a force gauge for the finger curls. And yeah, I don't personally think that I need to measure it in order to create a lot of force. And I like doing the finger curls just isometrically, so I wouldn't even really call them concentric. I think they are concentric-like for the first chunk of the contraction. But the bulk of my muscular recruitment is in an isometric fashion. Once I'm already pushing into the edge, there's no change in the range of motion. But you're talking about hanging weight plates from the fingerboard and then, doing an actual range of motion concentric curl. And the fact that you said concentric only makes me think you already know this, but when you do the eccentric or lowering phase there, that would be the stressful part. So I would be smart about how much weight you do this with. I don't know what you would be getting out of it that you can't just get out of doing it in an isometric fashion with an infinite load, but teach their own, I guess. That concentric strength, that ability to like hit a 3-finger drag, for instance, and pull it into a crimp is a really useful thing. I think it's very much a coordination thing and something that makes sense to practice on the wall. But if it feels good to you to train it in a fashion like this, then I think that's great. I would just be really modest with the weights. The forces that you're using on the wall are probably lower than you think, and I think there's definitely some risk with that style of training. So it's interesting. It's not something I've programmed for myself because it just doesn't feel very relevant to me. But if it works for you, you should reach out and let me know. I'm definitely curious to hear. All right, that is all for the March AMA. Just a reminder, patrons get first dibs on questions each month. So if you want that, as well as access to the technical review videos that I mentioned earlier, some lectures that I've done are on there, exercise explanation videos on there, first dibs on upcoming courses, discount on my principles course that I released last winter, first dibs on merch. I'll have some new merch coming out. I don't think it'll be out. I was hoping for an April 1st drop, but that's not going to happen this year. Or if you just like my content and you want to support me, you can do that for $5 a month at patreon.com/jfireclimbing. Or you can go to my Instagram at CoachJFire, and you'll find a link on there in my bio. Until April, thanks everybody.